Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to your favourite podcast, the Transfer Talk podcast. My name is Pete Graves.
Oh, the Peter, so many Peters, they all go hand in hand through their Pete life. Hello, Peter.
Ah, brilliant, classic. Hey,
Welcome
controversial.
back. Well, yes, before you talk about your holiday, I know we have missed you, but I do need to give a mention to Robert Sayers, Sales and Lettings Manager, who actually DM'd me on Instagram.
Nice.
The idea for the song. There's a few others, but that was the one that went to the top. I had a few others that I thought I was going to use, but I couldn't because you weren't doing the show. So you're back now.
Well, thank you, Robert, for sending that in. And controversial to go with Blur when Oasis are very much the band on everyone's mind at the moment.
We have done a lot of Oasis, though, haven't we?
We have. I did like that whole Blur Oasis time back in the 90s was great, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was great. I wish we could just talk about music, actually, for most of this podcast, but we've got to talk about transfers. We've got a very special guest. David Ornstein is going to be joining us on the show in a little bit, and we're going to be firing some questions at him. I always think of like the likes of David Ornstein, yourself, Dharmesh, and there are others as well. There's sort of a holy trinity of transfers. There's only a handful of you, but you two are both very, very much in that handful. So I'm excited to have both of you on the show with me today. What a fantastic holiday I had, by the way, Tom. On the plane.
Oh, yeah, sorry, how was your holiday?
What?
Sorry, how was your holiday?
I was bored in the plane, and the gentleman behind me with his family, and if he will be listening because he listens to every single podcast. He said to me, "Oh, it's not long since he went to Florida last time, is it?" That was his opening gambit. Yeah. And I went, and I was trying to see if I'd seen him there or something. He was like, I listened to the Transfer Talk podcast. I remember Dharmesh doing his impressions of you and everything and saying that you'd gone to Florida.
Did he like the impressions?
He did, actually. Yeah, he did.
Good.
Rare.
Yeah.
He's in a rare group. And that's another handful of people.
A rare group?
That like your Geordie impression. Yeah, I think I'm not in that group, that handful.
Oh, wow.
No. But, I wear it, I listen, and, it makes me smirk. So we'll keep going. How have you been, mate? The podcasts were great. I listened on my Sun Lounger. How's it all been going?
Yeah, no, it's been great. We've had a couple of good shows. We've obviously missed you, Pete. It's not the same without you, but we muddled on through. So we'll have a look at the numbers later, I'm sure. And if they did go up, then maybe we'll need to look at it again.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure you don't need to look at them, guys. I've been told that they dropped off massively with me not here, so don't bother checking. We've got David Ornstein coming on a little bit later. But I just want to chat to you first, Tom. 2.5 billion spent more in this round. Just want to speak to you first, Tom, because it's now official. Premier League clubs have already spent more than £2.5 billion in this window. I mean, it's been incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's a record now. It's usurped. I think 2023 was the last biggest spend, when I think that was the year where Chelsea really, really went for it. But a load of clubs have gone for it this time. And if you think about City as well, that could have been even more because they actually went big in January. So to think that they spent over £150 million in January and yet even went for it again this time, it is a big old spend, isn't it? And look, as we record this, what are we, 5 days to go? Not that I'm counting. I am. I think I'm going to predict a bit of a hostage to fortune here. I'm going to predict it's going to go through 3 billion.
Wow.
3 billion.
That's unbelievable. So, I mean, like you say, inevitable in these final 5 days of the window, there's going to be even more spending. So many big deals still cooking, which we're going to get into. And of course, it's worth mentioning that Premier League clubs are not too far away from breaking the record for player sales as well. That's currently 1.5 billion. So is that the knock-on effect? Because teams have been selling so well, they've been able to spend even more.
Well, I think the way that PSR works, I think they've almost been forced into a position where they definitely have to sell well. They're trying to negotiate on every single part of a deal to make sure that they can get the most amount of money for it. Because remember, when teams do receive money, that can go straight in the books. Whereas when they spend the money, that can be amortized over the length of a contract. So that's a big reason, I think, why some of these clubs are able to go into the market and spend big, because they're becoming so astute and so good at selling. And you can look at, two big examples, Pete, so far in this transfer window. I know we keep talking about how much Liverpool and Chelsea have spent, but the amount that they are recouping as well is absolutely incredible. I think Chelsea at last count had received £270 million plus in sales through this transfer window, which is quite extraordinary. Liverpool close to that amount as well, with the players that have left and the money that they've received, even though they've gone big. So I think clubs are almost forced to be in that position whereby it can't just be spend, because they've always got an eye on June the 30th while these PSR rules are in their current form. So yes, massive reason why you're getting this big spend is because they're being really, really good with their sales too.
Why is it that it's the Premier League specifically that it seems to have established itself as the sort of powerhouse of transfers right across, well, the world really, as far as football's concerned? I mean, the Premier League just leads the way with everything as far as big money deals.
I mean, look, I don't think that's new. It's always been the case. I think the broadcast revenue for the Premier League is much higher than any other league in European football. Add to that the global reach of the Premier League as well. I mean, you've probably seen it while you were out in Florida. I'm sure, I don't know whether the Premier League had started by then. I think it had. You were still there, weren't you?
Yeah,
they were showing
absolutely.
Games there. There are fan clubs there. It's everywhere. And that's the global reach of the Premier League. And that just feeds into how well that product has been marketed. And great marketing means more money. More money means that the Premier League effectively is going to be in a position where they can spend and outspend, every other club in European football. Sometimes you look at the likes of Real Madrid and Barcelona, and sometimes you'll say, well, why have they gone there? Well, that's a kind of different case in point, isn't it? Because those are the two of the clubs that are almost iconic for players. Oh, one day my dream is to play for Real Madrid, or my dream is to play for Barcelona. So that's why they will always get amazing players as well, coupled with the fact that they've got money to spend as well. Not so much Barcelona, but because we know about all of their financial problems that they've had. But it's no secret and it's no surprise that this happens with the Premier League, because it's been the case for so long. I recall whenever I speak to Gianluigi Di Marzio at Sky in Italy, he's always asking me about, is this deal going to happen? How much money is going to be involved? And he always jokes with me, just tell them, look, we are poor. The Premier League is rich. Just tell them to spend the money, because the Serie A needs the money.
Yeah, that's it. You're right what you say about the Premier League games started when I was in Florida. The opening game for Newcastle was away at Aston Villa. It was a 7:30 a.m. kickoff in Florida, and I watched it with the Orlando Mags Club out in Florida, and there was a whole host of a combination of Geordies who live out there and guys who were on holiday, and then also some Florida residents who support Newcastle. There was a whole bunch of us got up early to watch it at a bar over there, and someone handed me a beer at sort of 7:15 in the morning, and I sort of winced, but I did what I did and got through it. But I'd put it this way. I'm looking forward to a few months of nothing but water passing my lips now. But if you are listening, the Orlando Mags was great to see you all. And thanks for making me feel so welcome. All right, I think we can now welcome our special guest. So here he is, Mr. Ornstein himself. David, how are you, mate? I'm sure you're looking forward to Tuesday.
I'm surviving, Pete. I'm certainly not thriving, but I'm crawling towards the finish line. And the difficult thing is you're probably going to have the busiest few days of the entire market at the end, just when you've got so little energy left. But it's all good fun and games. It's been a tumultuous summer, and we can take our foot off the gas a little bit after 7 p.m. on Monday. So, raring to go.
I was saying to Dharmesh just before, there's a very small handful of transfer reporters that are really sort of the gods of transfers, and you two are both in that very small handful.
No,
so
come on.
It's brilliant to be here in between you guys here, sort of chatting transfers. I feel like a young music reporter. I think I said this last time you're on, but who's been thrust between Lennon and McCartney. So this is absolutely fantastic.
Let it be, mate. Come on.
Oh gosh.
I'm definitely Ringo Starr. No, I was saying to Dharmesh before, David, I mean, has it surprised you how much money we've seen spent and all the cash that's been sort of been thrown around in this window?
It's not a surprise to me. As we get ever further away, thankfully, from COVID and the implication that had on the market and restrictions on spending, and really profound consequences for clubs who were cutting staff members, redundancies and trimming in all manner of areas, and that really was reflected in the market. They've kind of rebuilt window by window to the point now where many of them have got their houses in order, not everyone. And now coming to terms with the PSR, profitability and sustainability rules for the Premier League, financial fair play for European competition, and are sort of loaded up. They've got ammunition. They're ready to hit the market. That's one side of it. Another is the sort of ever increasing desire to succeed, to win, to progress, to avoid relegation, to get into the European mix. It's an insatiable appetite from the fans to see transfers, but also within the clubs to get better. And trading has become a more conscious thing now in terms of clubs know they need to do deals. In the past, you saw that sort of thing in Italy, for example, in Spain. Not so much here. Everyone wanted to buy, nobody wanted to sell, but there are clubs who are realising the importance of it. It's critical to go in both directions. Now, it's not been the same impact as we saw a couple of years ago with the sort of rise of the Saudi Pro League and the injection of funds that brought to Europe and in particular the Premier League. But irrespective, there's just an explosion of activity, and I don't remember a summer like it, with so many narratives, so many twists and turns, so many unexpected deals, potential deals, conversations going on about all manner of possibilities, and if nothing else, it's provided a lot of entertainment for the public.
Yeah, without doubt. You said there's going to be a lot more money spent between now and the deadline as well. So let's get into some of those big deals. Alexander Isak has been the one we've all been talking about. I mean, as you know, mate, I'm sick to the teeth of sort of talking about Isak, but it seems to change day by day. What's your latest thoughts on the situation there, and how do you see it playing out?
There's so much to this situation. A lot of it we know and have heard. A lot of it I'm sure we don't know and haven't heard and might do subsequently. For example, at the end of last season, people like me reporting that with Newcastle qualifying for the Champions League, Isak, in Newcastle's mind, is going nowhere. We fast forward by a few months and we learn that he was clear in his intention to Eddie Howe that he wants to go towards the end of the season. And then releases his public statement, and he's pushing hard. He's not training. He's not playing. Liverpool are there lurking. They've made an offer, not come back in yet. How's it going to end in these final few days? So I think the most accurate summation of it came from Eddie Howe himself when he said there's no update. When he spoke, was it before and after the Liverpool game? And that's the truth, because at the time of recording this, there's a lack of clarity. And that's not just window dressing or us not knowing. I really think that is the situation, because Newcastle's stance could not be more clear. They've not been looking to sell Alexander Isak. They have him under contract, a very lucrative one, until the summer of 2028. And in their mind, and we've all consistently said this, they want to continue with him as their front man, leading them into the Champions League and the future. Unfortunately for them, he doesn't see it that way. He wants out. And despite conversations taking place, and we've all seen the reports about meetings at Alexander Isak's house, etc., all of our understanding is that he remains resolute and steadfast in his stance, that it hasn't changed. And that's sourced from people privy to the entire story. You know, you hear from certain quarters people saying, this camp is doing this and this club's putting pressure on. I'm afraid from my experience anyway, that's not how it works in your sourcing of information. And that has manifested itself because we've seen that he absolutely doesn't want to be playing, wants to leave, wants to join Liverpool, sees his chapter at Newcastle as being over. And that's really uncomfortable for Newcastle fans. And it's not nice. And whether we like it or not, it is just the situation. So what was always clear in recent weeks was that this match between Newcastle and Liverpool needed to be done and dusted before any movement would be would come about. Now that match is out of the way, we are into this zone where at any moment, any day, in the coming days, or even if it goes right down to the deadline, 7 p.m. on Monday, we could genuinely see some developments one way or the other. Now, the only obvious development is that, Newcastle managed to land some targets because they've been trying, despite their stance in not wanting to sell him. They have been scouring the market, whether it be for the Callum Wilson replacement, whether it be in case Isak leaves. And if any of that effort comes off and Liverpool then come back in at a satisfactory number, which they haven't done so far since that £110 million bid, then of course a deal can happen. Nobody has suggested otherwise. But there are a lot of ifs and buts in that on every side of the equation. And therefore there's just no guarantee that it's going to happen. And it raises the prospect, of course, that window shuts and he's still at Newcastle United. And then comes the unknown of whether he would stick to this supposed approach of not wanting to reintegrate and having played his last game for Newcastle, or whether he does come back into training and play for Newcastle again, potentially into the future. I don't think any party is really focused on that part just now because they're dealing in the present, and every minute and every hour and every day is really crucial. But as I said, at the time of recording this, there is no clear, concrete direction of travel. But of course, efforts are being made on all sides in terms of Newcastle exploring reinforcements in that part of the pitch. Liverpool waiting in the wings, maintaining their interest. Isak determined to leave and get his move. And it's all bubbling up for an explosion, a crescendo potentially very soon. And finally some clarity to all of this. Or maybe it doesn't explode and we pass 7 p.m. on the 1st of September. And then is a huge question about what happens next. And that's something that none of us can answer.
One thing that, just picking up on what David said there, was interesting to me is that with 12 days to go, I think that was when Alexander Isak put out that statement. And then it all became really, really public. And it was basically him saying, effectively, I've got 12 days to try and influence this deal because nothing else has worked thus far. On top of that, Newcastle United then went public with their statement. But what was interesting with their statement is they said that the conditions and the terms of a deal have not been met. So by definition, there are conditions and terms for a deal to be done for Alexander Isak. And it's, as David explained there, it's twofold. There's got to be a price that Newcastle have in mind that must be matched. But the other conditions have to be that there have to be replacements for Newcastle United. And they went on to say they don't expect the conditions to be met. I just wonder whether that was a thinly veiled message towards Liverpool. It ain't enough what you're offering. So if you do want him, you're going to have to raise that price to what we want. And as David mentioned there, crescendo time. He's absolutely right. We're recording this with 5 days to go. And I mean, I mentioned at the top, didn't I, Pete, that I expect that the spending to go through 3 billion, and there's still a chance that a big contributory factor towards £3 billion could yet be this deal.
We're going to talk about Yoane Wissa in a moment, but this latest on the Wolves striker, another bid going in for Jørgen Stand-Larsen last night, and this morning, I believe, talks continuing. Guys, any thoughts on this? I mean, is this seen as a sign that maybe Newcastle are bracing themselves for Isak's departure?
Well, I think that Newcastle have been doing their work the entire window around this possibility, because they went strong for Hugo Ekitike, and I know their intention or their stated aim was to play him with Alexander Isak, which ironically is what Liverpool want to do. But of course, if Ekitike had been landed, and the way Eddie Howe tends to play with one main striker, that might have opened the door to an Isak departure. And, the likes of Wissa and Strand-Larsen are ideally, in Newcastle's mind, being targeted as a Callum Wilson replacement. They also looked into Benjamin Sesko. That feels an age ago, like it was a different year, but they battled with Manchester United for his signature. We reported on their interest in Samu at Porto and a number of others. We haven't mentioned Nicolas Jackson yet as a potential option. There is clearly a world, we're not naive, in which Alexander Isak leaves and one or two replacements come in and Newcastle move out without somebody that doesn't want to be there, which is something Eddie Howe has touched upon in terms of his squad more broadly. He only wants players playing for him who are fully committed, and clearly Isak isn't, and Newcastle showed without him the sort of quality and spirit they have at their disposal. And if they could get a bit more in, they've actually, whisper it, had a pretty good summer in terms of how they've reinforced. I don't think we should take our eyes away from that. It's a better squad now than it was last season, but there is the Isak conundrum. Strand-Larsen fits into that in terms of their targeting of him. So there's been a couple of offers now, £55 million rejected. This is one of many cases, and I've, again, never really known a market like it, of different people saying different things. So around Newcastle, the verdict, the version of events is that talks have been positive, productive, leading to the bids, and they're continuing, ongoing, and hope to reach a conclusion and bring him in. When you speak to people around Wolves, they say no talks, no positive discussions, but bids have come in, and there have been no talks subsequent to the bids. And so he's not for sale. We don't intend to lose him, and it would take something crazy for that to change. Don't forget, there's clubs who talk in these situations. There's also intermediaries and agents who do it on behalf of clubs, and we've seen that in many situations this summer. The player would like to make the move to Newcastle if possible, but he's not taking the sort of Isak Wissa approach. You could say Gyökeres as well, and a number of others this summer of taking issue with the club. He is respectful of Wolves, and he's not agitating to leave. So let's see if Newcastle keep pushing and get to a stage. Don't forget that, like in every one of these situations, Wolves would need to bring in replacements to cover a guy that scored 15 goals last season and is already off the mark impressively this time round. So that would be a really impressive addition. The sort of way it's being framed as it's a Callum Wilson replacement, like Wissa is too, and no one really wants to talk on or off the record about the idea of now an Isak replacement. And then you've got a comparable situation with Wissa, because Newcastle fans immediately say, no, he was promised he could leave for a set price. That was never said with Alexander Isak. I think we need to be very careful about what we're believing here, or what we know to be the case. So nobody knows what was said between Wissa and Brentford, apart from Wissa and Brentford, and even within that, it sounds like there's discrepancy. No one knows what's happened for certain, or very few people know what's happened for certain in every conversation between Isak, his camp, Newcastle. And so we can't immediately say it's absolutely okay what's going on with Wissa, and it's absolutely not okay what's going on with Isak. They are very delicate situations, and we should be prepared for potential movement in all of them before that cut-off, but with an acceptance that because it's so intricate, everyone needs replacements if they're going to release players. Everyone needs financial numbers to be hit. There's not necessarily a world in which it all happens. Some players could stay put. They may be grumpy, they may not. There could be a bit of anticlimax in it all. It's just the nature of a very live situation.
Doms, what are you hearing on Wissa? What's the latest there with him? Because it is a very comparable situation to the Isak one.
Yeah, but as David rightly said, there we've got to be very careful when we're comparing these situations, because we are privy to certain bits of information. There'll be certain bits of information that certain parties will want out there. And I'm not just saying the representatives of the players, but also the clubs as well. We can't immediately just say that one or the other is right. Maybe they're both right. What we do know is that Wissa does not want to play for Brentford again. He's got no intention of playing for Brentford again. And that's where you can draw the comparison with Alexander Isak, because he feels the same. He feels, Wissa, that he was given assurances that he would be allowed to go. He says he's been speaking to Brentford over the last 6 months about potentially leaving in this transfer window. That hasn't materialised yet. Brentford will say, look, no such assurances were made, but in Brentford's defence, they will want to bring in replacements. They did not want to start this transfer window. They had no intention of a transfer window where both Bryan Mbeumo and Yoane Wissa would leave the club. Now, if they were to both leave the club, which is still up in the air, they would need to replace them with the requisite quality. Now, Dango Ouattara has been described as the Bryan Mbeumo replacement. And so when he joined, I think that a lot of Newcastle fans were getting excited that now the Wissa deal would happen, but it was still going to require a Wissa replacement. Now they are looking, make no mistake about it, Brentford, as publicly as Keith Andrews will say, oh, I still want Yoane to stay. I expect him to stay till the end of the window. They're looking for replacements for Yoane Wissa. That is the story at the moment. It's whether they can get one in before the deadline is the big unknown at the moment. And coupled with that, they are still going to need to negotiate again with Newcastle United and get the price that they want. Newcastle will probably hope that the later they go in the window, and if they do get a replacement, they'll be able to get a good deal. I don't think Brentford are going to look at it like that, rather like Newcastle wouldn't look at it like that with regard to Alexander Isak, because they've got their value for him and they want that to be met. So as David rightly mentioned there, this can go either way. And the situation where Isak remains at Newcastle and Wissa remains at Brentford is still very live, and it would be great to be a fly on the wall on either of those dressing rooms or at the training ground when they return on September the 2nd and say, well, we're still here.
Although that's an international break, so maybe they'll be gone for a little bit longer. Yeah. I just wanted to pick up on one point Dharmesh made around the sort of fluctuant nature of all of this. Unless you have a release clause in your contract, and this applies to both players we've talked about there and any others, the idea that you were told that you could go and this would be an acceptable price is all well and good. And I'm not saying I know whether it was said or not, but it's a market. Prices move. There is no fixed fee for any of this unless you've got it in a contract. And so everybody's calm when they talk about these things outside of windows, and you're amicable and you say, yeah, we won't stand in your way. And maybe conversations are interpreted different by different people. Maybe in one case, a club will say, yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. We'll deal with it at the time. And the player side takes that to mean, right, we're on. And this is the price we've got to hit. We're going to bring clubs, job done. You get to the window. These tense moments arrive, pressure is high, replacements are difficult to come by. And suddenly, the clubs will, in most cases, look after their interests ahead of anything else. and that's why I think we've seen a bit of animosity in these situations, because it's different interpretations of how and by which means exits can be secured. And ultimately, without these clauses, without it in writing, and with players under contract, clubs are always going to try and get the sort of highest price they can at that moment in time. And that has so many factors behind it that nothing is kind of definitive. And that's what we've seen in these cases.
We'll keep a close eye on the Isak, Stand-Larsen, Wissa, merry-go-round, and everyone else who might be involved in terms of replacements for Wolves and Brentford as well. Clearly, that one is still very active and moving all the time. But I wanted to get to some other big names as well, which are still being widely spoken about. Doms, I'll start with you on Gianluigi Donnarumma. Obviously, world-class goalkeeper. Lots of talk about him. Is he looking likely to move to the Premier League? What's the latest there?
I mean, PSG want him to move. Gianluigi Donnarumma wants to move. He's into the final year of his contract. He's on huge wages. They bought a new number one goalkeeper because they couldn't agree a new contract with Donnarumma. There's all this talk about Manchester City. But then again, as we've been speaking about with these other deals, there is a kind of a domino that needs to happen for Donnarumma to even be close to going to Manchester City, and that involves Ederson. We know Galatasaray are interested in Ederson, but there's only 5 days to go. They would need to sort out a deal for Manchester City to go in. Now, we're told that Manchester City have made initial contacts with PSG just about the conditions of a deal. The representatives, while they haven't discussed in detail what a deal would look like and personal terms would look like with Donnarumma, they've explored the framework of what that would look like. However, I think this is just in the background that Manchester City want to be in a position to act if Ederson was to go, because there's no point waiting until deadline day, have nothing set up for a potential Donnarumma move if Ederson leaves really late. They need to be in a position to act. So I think it would be dependent on Ederson's future, but clearly Donnarumma is a player who, widely regarded as one of the best goalkeepers in the world, is not going to play for PSG. That has been made clear. He said his goodbyes already, but it's one of those situations where he could end up saying his goodbyes and end up staying at Paris Saint-Germain, because that is still a big live option. It's a bit of a comparison with Emiliano Martinez, wasn't it? He was crying at the end of his last home game for Aston Villa, and here he is. He's still there. So it's going to be interesting to see how these last few days develop with regard to Donnarumma, because there is still scope for a move to happen there. But it's going to involve quite a bit of money, because at the moment, nobody at the moment is willing to touch the Donnarumma deal at the market value that PSG have him at, because they will just look at PSG and say, you don't want him. Why would we pay you 40 million? It's not in our interest to do that. So I think interested clubs are trying to play a bit of brinkmanship here, wait until the end of the window and see if they can get a good deal. I think it might even be in PSG's interests to even loan him and get rid of the wages off the books, because they would be making such a huge saving there anyway. Of course, they want to get a big transfer fee, but sometimes you can't always get what you want. They'd rather that than him staying beyond September the 1st, not playing and picking up what we believe to be £300,000 to £350,000 a week.
Ridiculous situation, isn't it, David? I mean, arguably the best goalkeeper in the world is in this situation, and no doubt a long line of potential suitors.
Yeah, when I saw him live in the Parc des Princes against Manchester City last season and Arsenal, I was just blown away by his quality. I'm really stunned that it's come to this at PSG. But they feel they've signed a really good goalkeeper, and life moves on. From their perspective, what I hear around the club, they do expect him to join Manchester City. Now, obviously, takes two to tango, or more than two, and there are many factors involved. But there is still time for that to happen. I think the key thing is, as Dams has really well explained, Ederson will need to go, and at the moment, Man City's top two goalkeepers are James Trafford and Ederson. They do, of course, have Ortega there at the moment as well, but it doesn't seem there's any movement on his front. And that's kind of the crux of this. If Ederson does move, then yeah, it's possible. There's contact between the clubs. I don't know of it being advanced. A solution would be found on personal terms, we're assured, if the clubs reach an agreement. But it is high expense on the potential fee. The loan suggestion by Dharms is interesting, isn't it? It's just tricky because he's out of contract next summer, and so I don't know how that would work. They wouldn't be looking to extend his contract. They wanted 40 million euros initially. Man City were nowhere near that. So can a compromise somewhere in the middle be met? And then you have the stylistic point as well. Is he what Manchester City are looking for in terms of playing out with his feet, blah, blah, blah. And they told James Trafford when they were signing him from Burnley that he would be first choice. And so where does that leave somebody like Donnarumma if he comes in on a hefty transfer fee and certainly a sizable salary from what we hear? So this is one of the most fascinating situations to watch before the window closes. There aren't many better players in their position who could move. We talked about Isak, and there's a few others here and there, but that is somebody who feels like he's at the top of his game. It's a remarkable situation they're in. Manchester United sort of very early in declaring that they're not in the frame for him. And anyway, they're looking at Lammens as a possibility, but we don't even know if that's going to happen because there doesn't appear to be a move at this point in time for Andre Onana. Alti Bayindir, maybe there could be a move on that front, possibly easier than Onana. But then Onana goes to the Africa Cup of Nations in winter, so Man United will need more reinforcements. And you say lots of clubs. I think every club should want somebody like Donnarumma, but it's not that straightforward. There are not many slots at the sort of clubs that he would go to, and there are very few clubs that can afford him, even if they maybe have the slots. So not an ideal outlook with less than a week to go, but certainly probably haven't heard the end of this one.
Well, let's get into another big name. Marc Guehi, right? I kind of blame Marc Guehi because for him, he was the sort of start of Newcastle's sort of difficulties in getting players that they wanted over the line. It all sort of started with Marc Guehi for me last January when they chased him all window and still didn't manage to sign him despite throwing ridiculous figures towards Crystal Palace. Surely his deal's almost up. There's a lot of talk that Liverpool might be the team that get Guehi. Clearly a talented player, not long left on his contract. David, is he Liverpool bound? Is he another one who's going to join the Anfield revolution?
Another one that's unclear, Pete, because it definitely could happen because we know the interest. There's been some initial talks between the clubs. Marc Guehi, as we understand it, if he's going to leave this summer, it's only going to be for Liverpool. But that's a big if because he's perfectly entitled to see out his final 12 months. He doesn't intend, as we understand it, to sign a new contract, which is really disappointing for Palace because they would love him to. And he would have his pick of clubs, including Liverpool again next summer as a free agent and all the benefits that come with that. Liverpool are shrewd operators. They'll know what levels they're prepared to go to. If they come forward with a credible offer, do Crystal Palace accept it? Which is pretty important for them, given they don't want to countenance the idea of losing him for nothing. But they would need to have replacements lined up and the clock is ticking. So do they actually end up not trading him and keeping him and appreciating the benefit of having Marc Guehi, European competition for the next 12 months and maximising his sporting qualities as opposed to financial? And then there's a decision for Marc Guehi to make as well. While we say it would be Liverpool if he leaves, there's no guarantee he does choose to leave. He will want assurances around game time if he is to leave. Liverpool have Van Dijk and Konate at the moment as first choice. They signed Leone as well. They've got Joe Gomez when he's fit. And it's a massive year for Marc Guehi with the World Cup on the horizon, and he's really happy at Crystal Palace. He's a top lad. He's not flustered by this sort of thing. He'll take the right decision for him, and he'll go on, I'm sure, and have a magnificent season and continue to flourish for club and country. So, yeah, it's definitely possible, but there is no way in which this is guaranteed at this moment in time.
It's another huge name, Darms, isn't it? Marc Guehi. I mean, they just keep coming. The likes of Donnarumma, Isak, Wissa, Guehi, all still very much in the mix for transfers. And like we've all said from the start, the last 5 days of this window, as we're recording this, are going to be frantic. What about Savinho? Do we know what's happening with him? Tottenham Hotspur, sort of hugely linked with the Manchester City player. Again, Dave, I'll come to you first, mate. Something that you think could happen?
This is a more remote chance than the others from what we're hearing now, because it all rests really on the Rodrigo and Real Madrid outlook. Rodrigo, clearly there's been a possibility of him leaving this summer, but ultimately, if Real Madrid decide he's staying, or he decides he's staying, because I think it would take him telling Real Madrid, I want to go, and then they might open the door to a conversation. If he did, then Manchester City and Pep Guardiola really like him, and so there would be a discussion, some dialogue. If that happened, then, of course, perhaps Manchester City's stance, which is they don't intend to sell Savinho, could maybe soften, and that they could have a conversation with Tottenham about Savinho. Tottenham really want him. Of course, we know some initial talks took place. But what I've just explained there is really complicated. And if Rodrigo, seemingly the chosen player for Manchester City, if they're going to strengthen the wing, doesn't move, then it massively decreases the chances of them even considering releasing Savinho. Now, maybe they've got some other targets that come to the fore in these days, and they look to bring someone in, and again, they reconsider the Savinho situation. But right now, it's not moving. As much as Tottenham would like to sign Savinho, and Savinho, it sounded like, would be open to the opportunity. And so something needs to be unlocked to get that developing. And I really don't know if that's going to happen in this window.
It's crazy, isn't it? This window's been open for 3 months. And with 5 days to go as we record this, things still need to be unlocked. Man, where have these keys been for 3 months? Where have they been?
I know. It's fascinating. I can't think of another window in recent memory where there's so many massive plates spinning as we head into the final few days. But clearly Spurs need a player in that sort of position. They've lost Maddison, unfortunately, to that injury. And clearly Thomas Frank, Spurs made a great start to the season as well. Would love to strengthen again if they can. Guys, I'm keeping a close eye on the time. So we're going to take a very, very quick break and then rattle through some of the other names that are sort of making the headlines at the moment. So we'll be back in a few moments. Okay, welcome back. This is the Transfer Talk podcast. Delighted to be joined by Dharmesh Sheth and David Ornstein discussing all the big transfer stories at the moment. Right, let's get into Everton. Tyler Dibling, Southampton, £42 million. David Moyes was speaking at the start of the window about needing a 9 or a 10 new players into his squad. David, Tyler Dibling, top player. They've had a good window.
Oh, well, they came into the summer, I think, with 12 players under contract, which is just extraordinary. And, there was a lot of debate among the Everton fans about whether they should have renewed some of those. Others were coming to the end of their time, and it was clear they'd be departing. There is a lot of quality there still, Iliman Ndiaye in particular. And they've been able to upgrade in certain areas. It was a frustrating start to the market, but then things have started to develop with Jack Grealish. We know he's a top player, and nothing would give him greater motivation than getting back to his best form in a World Cup year. He lives in the region, so it was an appetizing move for him, clearly on a football and personal level. And then they had been targeting Dibling throughout. Fair play to them on that. They were the most consistent and serious contender. It turned into a bit of a one-horse race. And so that's why negotiations became quite tricky, because Everton knew that they were the only team there if at that sort of level of price. Southampton know his quality, talent now and potential. Also that he would just go into his final 2 years if a deal wasn't done, and very possibly not sign a new deal and end up leaving for nothing, which they can't really afford to do, especially now they're in the Championship. So eventually they got there, and in the end it got wrapped up in remarkable speed. And I know it's not been the smoothest path for him. He went to Chelsea initially, came back to Southampton. But this is a player of such high potential and you know, is a really exciting talent for now Everton and England, of course. And if he can fulfill that potential, what a signing it might prove to be for Everton. And I don't think they're done there. There's more that they will want to fill because of what you say around the lack of activity and the need for it in so many different positions. And, you know, player we need to keep an eye on as this window draws towards a close. Everton among his suitors is Hayden Hackney at Middlesbrough, another really good one. Yeah. And I think it will be busy. It's interesting because you normally hear that clubs don't have much money. Well, David Moyes and the noises from around the Friedkin Group and Everton are that we do have money. It's just about getting on and spending it and not being turned down by the players that we're going for. And that was the story for some weeks, but it doesn't seem to be now. And the way that they started at home with that win over Brighton and the atmosphere and the kind of players they're bringing in, it may well attract more in these final days, and they've got the financial resource to do it. So look, I think they're going to be fine this season, and they're going to want to be upwardly mobile. And so despite some very difficult days, there's nothing to say that it won't end on a high this window for Everton.
Yeah, David Moyes will be delighted with the players he's been able to bring in so far. And as you say, still potential for more business there as well. Arsenal are another team that have had a good window. They've got a good win at the weekend, didn't they? And they're seeing their new man, Gyökeres, scoring a couple of goals as well will be a delight for Mikel Arteta. But David, looks like they're not done either with looking at another defender, the Bayer Leverkusen player, Piero Hincape. What are you thinking with that one? Is that directly linked to Jacob Kiwior leaving?
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary summer, Pete, at the Emirates Stadium. We've not seen business like it. Inbound, certainly, and the level of expenditure suggests they're really going to need to challenge and potentially get over the line in these competitions this season. So Hincape is bit of a surprise one I broke. That he's always been very high on their recruitment list for that left-sided central defence position, or even capable of playing left back. He's a top player. Let's make this clear for Bayer Leverkusen, Ecuador national team, and yeah, it would relate to Kiwior's potential departure with Porto working on a deal. Let's see also if any movement occurs with Zinchenko. It hasn't so far, but I think in an ideal world for Arsenal, they would maybe move on Kiwior, Zinchenko, even the likes of Fabio Vieira, Reece Nelson. Obviously, that's straying into other areas of the pitch to raise the sort of resource to balance out some of the spending that they've committed already this summer, but also to go one further and really provide that extra defensive option. But he can attack as well, Hincape, up that left side, which is an area of the pitch that Arsenal have been looking to improve in. And, you know, there is some method, so many questions to me about why are they doing this? I actually totally get it. If Kiwior goes, if something happens on Zinchenko, there's been injuries to Calafiori, Lewis Skelly, you know, it was such a rapid rise in development that some patience is required, whether he's at left back, whether he's a midfield option. And then obviously Eze's come in. Maybe when Martin Odegaard plays, is stationed slightly towards the left. Yes, he's not a left winger. He comes inside. So if you had an overlapping player like a Lewis Skelly, a Calafiori, a Hincape, then I get it. But a deal needs to be done. We're getting ahead of ourselves here. There's a 60 million euros release clause. Efforts are being made to try and negotiate what would be a more realistic market rate, given the sort of interest in him and what value players like him have gone for this summer. It's been a tough window at Leverkusen with change of coach, but also so many players leaving. He wants to make the move. He's prioritising Arsenal ahead of other options. And so, yeah, let's see. Arsenal clearly going for it with him, but there's no outcome to it yet.
It'd be interesting how this all materialises, actually, Pete, because the messaging we're getting is that the focus has always been on sales once the Gyökeres and, to a later degree, Eberechi Eze came in. But I think in the background, there must be some sort of assurances Arsenal are getting that these players will move on before the end of the window, because you can't time transfers sometimes. You could say, right, we need to get rid of 1, 2, 3, 4 players before we can go back into the market. But if the player that you want becomes available before you've made those sales, then you continue making the work to ensure that at some point those players will leave, but you can't ignore the fact that the market opportunity has come up. So I think Arsenal have grabbed every single market opportunity possible in this transfer window. David mentioned that there's been an extraordinary window for them. I know we expected them to be busy, quite this busy. I don't think anyone really predicted that. But with some of those departures, I think there is some sort of assurance that maybe before the end of the window, something will happen. And I think Porto might be playing a big part in this as well, because they seem to be interested in Kivior. That one looks close. I think there's an interest in Zinchenko from Porto as well as Fabio Vieira, because the Stuttgart deal looked like it was going to happen. That one's kind of cooled off a little bit now, because it doesn't seem possible that the money's being spoken about that Stuttgart might be able to do that deal. Sambi Lokonga is another player, obviously still at Arsenal, despite a couple of loan spells that he's had before, that they will listen to suitable offers for. Reece Nelson as well. I think that one was expected to have been done weeks ago to Fulham, but it seems that they're still thrashing out the structure of a potential deal for that one. And I think Fulham are probably looking at what happened last season. They clearly like the player because they took him on a season-long loan, but he got a bad injury as well. So they just probably taking that into account and maybe using that with Arsenal to try and get a better deal. But it's clear that there's a willingness from all parties to try and get that deal over the line. But if they can get Hincape as well, you're looking at 250 to 300 million pound spend for Arsenal, which I don't think many people were expecting. But I think they're still in the background, starting just to knock off these players who they want to offload.
Yeah, and Newcastle fans listening to this podcast, they'll hear of Porto being interested in all these players and instantly think of David's story of Samu and his links with Newcastle. I wonder whether they're going to get a windfall of cash for him. But again, that's another one we have to keep an eye on. Dom's just on Manchester United. They've spent a lot of money as well, haven't they, this window? Still looking at a goalkeeper, though. Senne Lammens, what are we hearing?
Yeah, I mean, this one looked more advanced a few days ago than it does just now. David alluded to it there just before. There's no guarantee that this deal is going to happen. I think Manchester United have got their price in mind. There's been lots of reports that Galatasaray may have come in with a higher offer. Manchester United aren't going to get involved in a bidding war. They believe that Lammens wants to come, and they are discussing this deal at around £17.3 million. They don't want to get involved with, Royal Antwerp saying, we'll go send him to Galatasaray. I think United probably are looking at other options, not just Senne Lammens as well. And there could be a situation where there might not be any arrivals in the goalkeeping department at Manchester United simply because of how this deal is going, and they'll keep their powder dry until maybe January. David mentioned it before. Onana is going to be likely to be going to the African Cup of Nations, so you can't rule anything out at the moment. I think they still want to do the deal, but they want to do it on their terms. So definitely, again, another one to watch. And I think the feeling was, how many number twos are Manchester United going to have? I just get the impression that if, and it's a big if still, Lammens was to come in, I think they will eventually try at some point this season to try and mould him into the number one. Because if it's Altay by India that he is choosing ahead of Andre Onana, who was the number one at United last season, then something is going on there. They're trying to send that message to Andre Onana, rather like they did with Rasmus Højlund, that maybe your time might be up here.
Any other incomings, do we think, at Manchester United? I mean, a lot of talk amongst the fans about the sort of central midfield situation, and we're going to get into Kobbie Mainoo in a little bit. But are we expecting any more incomings?
Yeah, I mean, David knows all about this one. They tried to get Carlos Baleba. There was a serious interest in him. The price was just far too excessive for Manchester United to get involved. We're not expecting that one to be revisited in this window just because of the finances that are involved in that deal. But I think it's one of those ones where Manchester United might be careful here, because if he is their number one target, which we believe him to be, and there's a chance that they might be able to get him in another transfer window, do Manchester United start learning lessons from what they've done in the last 10 to 12 years when they've gone into the transfer market? If they haven't got their first choice, they've just decided, let's just bring in players anyway. And now they're finding themselves in a position where they've got a bit of a mishmash of a squad. If Baleba is gettable, maybe not in this transfer window, but in a future transfer window, are they risking not getting him by bringing in another player with 5 days to go in this window and spending some of the money that might be apportioned to what they could spend on Baleba at a future date? So I think there's something they're going to have to think about. They are looking at other midfielders. I think Angelo Stiller from Stuttgart is a player that they like, but I mean, he's got 3 years left on his contract still, so that would be difficult to do as well. And with just so little time left in this window, I don't think United want to be in a position where they have been in the past when it looked like they've panicked and brought in players. They don't want to be in that position again, so that when the time comes when they need to go for their number one targets in future transfer windows, they might be a bit hamstrung because they've got too many players in that position already.
Feels like a good time to talk about Kobbie Mainoo. David, thoughts on this? Could he leave?
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation, because I don't think in an ideal world Manchester United would want to lose such a proud homegrown player that's come through their system in a really important part of the pitch where Dharmesh has just explained they're looking to strengthen, and they've got someone within their ranks of that sort of profile. And I'm sure he would have envisaged himself rising up through Man United and staying with them for many years to come. But you can say the same about a Jesse Lingard, a Marcus Rashford, and so many more besides. It's not ideal. He's not playing. He wants to be playing. He's into the last 2 years of his contract. There's been no agreement so far. Clearly, that's problematic. Loads of clubs would like to sign Kobbie Mainoo, but on what terms, given he's not playing alone? I'm just hypothesizing here. Well, Man United wouldn't want to do that. What if Bruno Fernandes gets injured and he's next in line? Then absolutely not in their head. So we could be heading for a bit of a collision course here between player and club in the next days, and they're going to have to try and talk it through, because we understand he is open to leaving Manchester United. He wants to get on the pitch, and that's not happening at the moment. Way back in January, I can't even remember if we talked about it on this podcast, but definitely it was well documented that Mainoo and Garnacho were reluctantly being seen by Manchester United as potential departures to help their compliance with PSR FFP. I think as time passed, it became more that Garnacho was the preferred departure, and they would love to get things right with Kobbie Mainoo. And I'm not saying that stance has changed in the club's mind, but actions speak louder than words, and Ruben Amorim hasn't been using him. He's wanted to sign Carlos Baleba, and is the writing on the wall? I think this is one that we need to pay close attention to. We're not saying he's certainly going to leave by any means, but I do think there will be some movements to try and engineer something, because clubs like him, clubs are looking for that position. He needs minutes, and it's a delicate and very topical situation.
It feels like Manchester United could make a few sales in these closing days of the window. You've got the likes of Anthony potentially going back to Real Betis. He did well there last season on loan. Rasmus Højlund remains in the air. Where's he going to be playing come the 2nd of September? And you've mentioned there Alejandro Garnacho. So let's just finish on Chelsea. they're clearly still trying to bring some players in. Could be some players going out. We talked about Nicolas Jackson. Let's just talk, David, about Garnacho. Xavi Simons is another one. Do you see them bringing those two players in? Presumably, if they can maybe get Jackson out the door.
Well, I mean, a lot of eyebrows were raised when Man United were looking at signing both Simons and Garnacho, having already signed Gittins. But I think you've got to understand that judgments can't really be formed until the end of these windows, because you can get players out that make it look logical then when it isn't necessarily now. The one I think is most likely to go through from Chelsea's perspective is Garnacho. The clubs have been in talks, a couple of bids rejected. I sense they will get there on an agreement, but perhaps not until deadline day. Clearly, Garnacho wants it to happen, and it will be a crucial sale for Man United as they try and balance the books. You've listed some of the names there. I think there's some positive movement for Man United on Antony as well. Maybe Malacia goes on loan before the deadline. So they're going to shift. Jadon Sancho's a bit trickier, and let's see what he wants to do as much as what Man United want to do. They've also got January 2026 and up until June 30th, 2026 to raise some money from outgoings. In terms of Simons, Chelsea's interest is clear, but I don't think it was ever as advanced a transfer as had been made out in certain quarters, because there are different priorities for different clubs here. Chelsea would like to bring him in, but they would have, it seemed like to have been part of swaps going in the other direction. That's something I don't think that Leipzig wanted. Leipzig then showed some interest that we reported in a permanent deal for Christopher Nkunku to return to the club where he played before joining Chelsea. But there's no guarantee that goes through. And the noises I'm starting to hear is that the Simons one is linked to Nkunku. And if Nkunku doesn't happen, then for the first time we're sort of getting soundings that maybe Simons doesn't ultimately, which would be an interesting end to what has been one of the longest running sagas of the summer. And so, yeah, there is a world in which maybe Garnacho happens and Simons doesn't. But I don't want to say that definitively, because we know that at this time of the window, anything can happen. Expect the unexpected. And certainly with Chelsea, who are always trading, and there might be more that happens inbound. We reported yesterday that Fermin Lopez of Barcelona is a surprise target. They're exploring, looking into that situation, giving consideration to a move. There's been contact with the player camp, not club to club with Barcelona at this point in time. So yeah, I always say never sleep on Chelsea, because they're doing so much activity in and out in the market, and definitely they'll be busy again in these days ahead.
Can I just make one quick point, Pete? One quick point, Pete. Not so long ago, when there was a Manchester United goal, and forgive me, I've forgotten who actually scored it, but there was that shot on the advertising hoardings, wasn't there, of Garnacho, Mainoo and Rasmus Højlund, and it was painted as this is the future of Manchester United. There's a chance, however remote, that all three could be out of Manchester United before the end of the window.
Yeah, incredible. You're absolutely right. It was iconic, wasn't it, that moment? And you saw it and you thought, future's looking bright for Manchester United. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, it's amazing how things can change with regards to the football and the lay of the land within squads. Nicolas Jackson, quickly, David, where's he going to end up? At Bayern Munich seems to be a strong link there.
It's a strong link, but it's not the only one. Bayern are interested, Juve, maybe even Newcastle, depending on the stuff we talked about earlier, and other clubs. There are many more from what we hear in the Premier League and on the continent. And so, yeah, obviously there have been some suggestions, terms agreed with this club, that club. I don't think that's the major issue. I think there are many clubs that will appeal to Jackson. They're high-level clubs that will put him front and centre. It's more the club-to-club situation. If it's going to be a loan, Chelsea, I'm sure, would demand a high loan fee. Who's prepared to pay that? Are they putting an obligation to buy? What is that figure? Would they actually roll the dice and go with a permanent transfer now? And at what value? some significant figures have been, reported, and how realistic is that for those clubs? Is that what Chelsea want? There are so many questions in this situation. Chelsea were waiting until the end of the Newcastle-Liverpool game to kind of make their decision on what to do with Jackson, because there's so much striker movement in this market that relates to Isak, Wissa, Stand-Larsen, everybody else we've discussed. And so now is decision time for Chelsea. They've recruited, so there doesn't appear to be space for him. Is he going to go? Sorry, I forgot to mention Villa are a club that really like him, but it's unclear if they can meet Chelsea's financial requests. If I was a gambler, I'd say that he will go before 7 p.m. on Monday. In what form? Unclear. And I've said so many are not guaranteed to happen. So I'm going to chance my arm and say this one is more likely to happen than not.
Okay, well, listen, we're out of time. I'm going to ask you both finally, very, very briefly. We've seen in recent windows sort of teams getting their sort of transfer work done before deadline day. There's just a feeling that we might have a very busy deadline day this time. So, Doms, I'll start with you, and I'll let David have the last word. Deadline day, are we going to see the busiest one we've seen for a long time?
Yes, we will, Pete. I think we're going to see a frantic last few days, actually, which will culminate on deadline day. As I mentioned right at the top, you talked about that record spend. I think there's still hundreds of millions of pounds that could yet be exchanged hands in the last few days. So yes, in a word.
David, deadline day, busiest we've seen in recent years?
Busiest final few days, certainly, because so many clubs want and need to do more than they've already done, and big clubs as well included in that. When I'm expecting big deadline days, they often flatter to deceive, and when you're expecting quiet ones, they surprise you. But given it's a 7 p.m. deadline, hallelujah, and so much needs to be done, I'm going to go with Dharms.
Amen.
I'm going to say it is going to be hectic.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we look forward to it. Of course, you guys will be two of the busiest men on the planet in these final 5 days. And I really appreciate both of you taking a big chunk of your day out to come and chat to us here on Transfer Talk. We are out of time. It's going to be a fascinating last few days of the window. Don't forget, you can follow Deadline Day on Sky Sports News throughout the day on September the 1st. A big thank you to all the guys behind the scenes for putting this podcast together. A huge thanks to David Ornstein and Dharmesh Sheth, two legends of the transfer world. And as always, the biggest thanks of all goes to you guys for listening. So wherever you are, whether you're in your car, on the train...
Before you do that, Pete,
go on.
The final bit, you said you're going to have the final word with David Ornstein, and I'm going to give him the final word because whenever we talk, he always mentions those 4 words that I say at the end of this podcast. So, David, I'm going to give you that honour to finish off this podcast once Pete has done his little bit. Get ready.
Putting him on the spot. Right, okay, well, here we go, Dave. Let's see if you remember. So, wherever you've listened to the podcast, in your car, on the train, in the wind or in the rain, in your house or in your shed, on your couch or in your bed, on the hills or in the valleys, in the streets or in the alleys, out for a run or maybe for a walk, thanks for listening to Transfer Talk.
And that, my friends, is for sure.
Yay!